Thanks, everybody. What I thought I would do, of course, I'm sharing my screen, and I'm excited for today because I get to actually give you an organized binder intro. And I thought I would start with just a quick recap of what we talked about last time, very, very brief, and go into kind of two parts. I'm waiting for the Zoom bar to disappear. There it goes. Um, And I'll explain what those two parts are. First part will be this session, and then we have one more session, and I'll introduce what we're going to talk about on the third session, which I'm excited about as well. Um, and then leave some time for Q&A, which we kind of ran short on when we were meeting last time, if I remember right. This is another little quirky thing with Zoom. If I go out of presentation mode now, it decides to bounce me out of share mode. So be patient with me if that happens. But thanks for having me back. So in session one, we of course we're talking about executive functioning skills. I think I referenced my book that came out last year and how in speaking of these skills and habits, I like to kind of steer clear of more wordy or kind of academic definitions of the phrase executive functioning. And sometimes in vernacular that we become familiar with, they can sometimes definitions and acronyms and explanations can be actually kind of exclusive for people who are new to maybe the topic. And so one of my goals in kind of an inclusive effort is to not simplify it, but try to use words that I think are more, or definitions are more approachable. And I just really like this term studentness. And what I asked you last time, and I ask educators to do is just think about, like, what does that conjure up for you? What do you envision? What do you think about with a student of any age that's starting to develop this sense of studentness? And I really like, of course, the word, there's an agency in learning, but also kind of a dexterity and like, I know how to do school. And for me as a student, one of the things I think that set me up to be an effective teacher was I never really felt like I knew how to do that well. And I remember sitting in classrooms and thinking, like, how come everyone else seems to know how to do this, but I don't? I kind of lack this sense of studentness. And now we know that these executive functioning skills really lay the foundation. And I want to remind you that the book one that I wrote and my focus with Organized Binder, what I'm going to introduce you to today, really is kind of grades 3 and up through 12, and then into college. We work with colleges as well. Currently working on a project for the primary grades, K through 3. And it's interesting because the if I was presenting to you in the primary grades, we'd be talking actually about some different or more the kind of foundational executive functioning skills. One of them, working memory, is here, but two others. And as young students or young people start to develop those, it gives them the capacity or the ability to start to practice and make these, I want to say higher order executive functioning skills, but skills that are possible if students are find themselves in this environment that is really thoughtfully or intentionally shaped in ways that leads to better executive functioning. That's true of all grades, and that's true of all environments. I know I mentioned this last time that it's really fun to be in an eclectic group of educators and folks working with kids because your environment, everybody's environment that we're shaping is different. It could be your classroom, it could be your office, it could be your school bus, it could be your whole school. So it elicits some really interesting conversations, but keeping those two words in mind, the sense of studentness and shaping the environment. And I say all that to say as a review that if you remember, these skills aren't taught. They're best learned when students clearly see them modeled and they get practice with them as a byproduct of engaging in a routine. Okay. And I'm not going to go into the detail I did last time, but this idea of clarity, modeling, and routine, take those three words put that in the environment. So how can I start to clearly model and shape the environment with a routine in ways that give students practice with them? Because remember that makahana kaike, the idea that there's certain knowledge we get by doing things, that the knowing is in the doing. And when we think of executive functioning skills and this sense of studentness, it's really about the knowing is in the doing. And to show you, to kind of recap all of that, remember, as I said, it's a byproduct, this idea of each step of this routine, and I'm going to transition over to organized bindery next, that each step of engaging in this routine, students get practice with the different executive functioning skills. So there's no kind of, in the traditional sense of the word or the didactic sense of teaching, there's no direct instruction or teaching of these executive functioning skills. It's about clearly modeling and establishing this routine. And then as a byproduct of that, students start to hone these skills. And I couldn't remember if I spent time or just mentioned this last time. So I left this slide in at the end of our review because this work, and I know for a lot of you on this call, you might place yourself in a tier 2 or tier 3 kind of level on an MTSS or RTI system. I really believe that this work with executive functioning, it doesn't have to be tier 1, but ideally it is tier 1 so that all students get practice with these skills and habits that are kind of laying that foundation for learning. So just keep that in mind, that what the approach that I'm going to take today with organized binder is really ideally tier 1. I'll talk about that as we go through here. So let's jump in. And I wish you all had one of these as a sample in front of you so you could feel it and look through it. And I definitely showed you some of this last week as well. But this is where we're going to spend some time today. And I'm going to introduce you to the daily component of organized binder. And the name came about because students started getting organized and they were really proud of their binder. And they kept talking about my organized binder and the name just kind of stuck. And I mention that because it's really not about the binder. The binder is just a tool to participate in the routine. Okay, so sometimes when we're working with schools, we got to make that very clear. Think, oh, it's about the binder. It is about the binder, of course, but it's more about instead of clearly modeling, that's the binder, and that's the tool students use to engage in this routine that I'm going to show you. Each of these system files corresponds to those 8 tabs in an organized binder. Of course, there's nonverbal visual cueing with the colors you can see, and then the letters. I can't remember if I mentioned last time. Those letters are arbitrary. It's design. The reason I added those and had instead of it just being color is the recognition that not everybody sees color the same, or some students might be colorblind. And so seeing shades of gray. And so I can have that same nonverbal visual cue with the letters as I do with the color. So again, kind of an inclusive approach there. And keep in mind that different steps of the routine were in different places of the binder, so that cueing is important to participate with the class. So the graphic I showed you in each of these steps, and by the way, Deborah, feel free to interrupt me completely. I'm not really watching the chat or anything. So if there's something I need to hear or be asked or
Okay, I
addressed,
will
just
monitor that right now. I think they're all just taking it in.
okay, good. So if you could just kind of think of that daily sequence I showed you, and I said that, this is kind of the point is each step of the routine, it's a different executive function. This is the routine. Okay. So we're going to start on something called the weekly lifeline. You can see the color's white and it is a B in the upper right-hand corner. And we're going to turn to the agenda, table of contents, and how we conclude. This is where we're going to spend our time today. The components of this program that are used periodically throughout the school year, that'll be our third session. One thing, if I were on a call with teachers, I'd make very clear, you saw it on the other graphic as well, this idea of teaching your class. I suggested last time that, teachers are short on time anyhow. So even if this is something they want to incorporate, if it has a significant time footprint on their lesson or on their class period or their school day, or even just their whole practice in terms of planning and everything, it's just less likely to be rolled out, which is why this is not a curriculum. This is about clearly modeling and establishing a routine to shape the environment in ways that leads to this sense of studentness. So let's jump in. I'm going to show you a video, as you all saw. um, and if you were in my classroom and we were in real life together in physical space, I would be modeling this as I'm doing for you, but I would have it projected somehow. I think the ideal application for this is a document camera, if possible. Not everybody has them, not everybody has the handwriting for that. But if you can just think of some way of projecting this, and I'm just going to speak to you from a traditional brick and mortar classroom. This can be used in other environments as well, and even one-on-one. And by the way, I'm more than willing to have those conversations, maybe Q&A at the end, what that might look like. But if keep it in the traditional kind of classroom environment, this would be projected for students as they're walking into class. If it were my classroom, I would probably be standing at the door. Not probably, I would have been standing at the door. This would have been prepped. You can see that number 5 in the upper right-hand corner. That would represent the 5th week we're using the program. Let's just pretend it's the 5th week of school. Um, and I would just kind of have this all prepped. It's Monday, September 14th, and students are showing up. And I was always a teacher that stood at the door and high-fived and greeted kids and talked to them and checked in and welcome to the class. And if I had this prepped ahead of time, there's that kind of nonverbal visual cueing that, hey, in order to be ready to go and engage with the learning community when we start, I just need to be in my assigned seat or desk or lab table or whatever the classroom environment's like, and have my binder open to this B page. One of the reasons I would like you to have all had one of these in front of you is you would see very clearly that there's one, the page in front of this tab A is gold. It's our goal setting. The one behind it's green. That's the agenda. And so just again, by that color coding and those letters, students, they're starting to see. So I'm modeling, this is identical to what they have in their organized binder, what we call the student bundle. But think about as students are coming into the classroom and they're starting to open their binders, right? Because they all have these. There's all that modeling and reinforcement and visual cueing in addition to what the teacher might be doing. Okay. And as class is about to begin, you'll see from the little video I'm going to show you, I'd make my way to the front of the class and then I would start the class. So the bell in a kind of, this is kind of more critical in a middle school or high school environment where we're shorter on time. If I have you all day, that start's kind of less critical. But there's a point here I want to make out, and you'll see it in the video, or a point I want to point out to you is what I'm advocating for is that we're starting class like this. And what I typically see on kind of pre-walkthroughs or visiting a school that before they've rolled out this program is there'd be some type of prompt, if they're starting with a prompt, that would be available or visible for students as they're entering the classroom. And the idea is they're coming in and it's meant to engage them the moment they walk in the class. And that's kind of considered a best practice in education. And I'm advocating to adjust that a little bit. Same cueing, but here's what's happening. As students are coming in and they're seeing this, it's still an engagement factor, but here's the distinction I want to make for you because it's really important. If we start this way, right? Because by the way, if you start with that prompt shown, because students arrive at different times, when class actually does begin, it takes me sometimes 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes as the teacher to wait till everybody's at a place where we can kind of go over, digest, and review whatever it is that's in that prompt, right? That reteach moment. That's precious class time that's wasted. And we can unpack that for a long time and what that can create and not create. But we can completely avoid that if we just have this same cueing. And what I'm doing is students are coming in, I'm high-fiving them and telling them to either get their binder if it's stored in class or take it out of their book bag, is I'm encouraging or I'm prompting students to engage in the work of getting ready to learn as opposed to the work of learning. And they're both, of course, important, but too often we jump to the work of learning the moment you come into class. Well, what if I arrive a minute after the student before me? I'm still on time and they're already working on this. There's this sense that I'm already behind and we haven't even started class yet. And it can kind of start to influence the learning environment. And that's where this word kickoff comes from. This prompt and do now, question that there's all kinds of names for it. It's nothing new. What might be new is it's captured all on this one page and that we call it a kickoff. But I wanted my students to understand. I grew up playing competitive soccer, and all my students at the time played or loved soccer. And so the idea, this analogy of a kickoff, I told them, like, you don't just show up to the soccer field on a game day and start playing the moment you arrive. That doesn't make any sense. You get your gear on, you warm up, you find out what position you're going to play. The other team's doing that. The officials come. There's this whole song and dance that happens. And you know, you don't even have to think about it anymore. This kind of automaticity has taken over because you've done it your whole life. But you know, your whole team's relying on you to be ready when that whistle blows. And I wanted my students to understand that the same is true for learning. And maybe just no one's ever shown you. And so in this class, every day, I'm going to show you what it looks like to be ready to go. And once you're all ready to go, then we're going to start. We're going to kick off the lesson. And we're just going to do that every day. And it's really simple. So then when the bell does ring, I'm going to show some type of content specific prompt, ideally. And we're encouraging educators to look backwards, revisit, reteach, clear up misconceptions. Okay. Couple things that happen there, and I'll talk about this more in just a bit. But at its base, what it's encouraging or kind of mandating that students do is they incorporate something called retrieval practice, that I have to go back, just as the term sounds, and retrieve that which I've learned or experienced and kind of hold it in cognitive space long enough to do something with it. That incorporates working memory, which is kind of the executive function for this beginning and concluding routine for that matter. And what we know from cognitive science, the more often that students are engaging their working memory with the things that they're learning, it's that process that helps it eventually move to their long-term memory. So it's increasing retentions because it's multiple exposures to what we're learning. Okay. And that's how we're going to start every day. And if we really were on the 5th week, by the way, and let's pretend I'm getting to the kind of the end of my first unit of study, and it was a standards aligned course, my students could have 25 standards aligned prompts and responses tied to the objective of every lesson in this unit that they can use to learn to study from. And imagine that, taking it out to the end of a semester, taking that to the end of a school year with just a simple prompt and starting routine. And for students, it really is this kind of safety net. So they know that even if I struggled in class yesterday, or I struggled with the homework, or I couldn't get to my homework, or whatever, this is right where we're going to start every day, and I can get my questions answered before we move on. Okay. So I want to show you what this kind of looks like. I also picked this video too, because you'll notice, depending on your age, you might pick up on the quote unquote projection technology in the room, but the same routine is in place. So this is actually my classroom a number of years ago. The students don't know they're being filmed, but they all on the backside signed, of course, like a photo release kind of thing. This could be shown. But what more than anything, I want you to hear, listen for the sound of the classroom once the bell rings and once we begin. By the way, I call this the crazy kickoff because it's my 5th period biology class. So it's like 36 kids after lunch. My TAs don't show up. And I had to scrap my whole 100, these were 100-minute block classes. So here I am with 36 kiddos after lunch and no real plan because my TAs didn't arrive to man some lab stations. I taught science. And then right then, so I'm kind of scrambling. I wish it was a higher quality video so you could like maybe see my facial expression or panic, trying to figure out what I'm going to do to try to salvage this thing. And right then a student comes in and asks if she can go to the bathroom, right? We just got back from lunch. Right after that, a student teacher comes in unannounced from a colleague and said, like, you can't hear our conversation. But she's like, hey, I heard about this binder program in here. Do you think I can do an observation this period? And I'm like, sure, sit in the back. This is just going to be nuts. But what even shocked me in watching this on the backside, by the way, all done for my own PD, not ever thinking I'd show it as a training video. It's like, wow, this clarity modeling and routine had clearly become automatic for these students. So here we go. Not 1 minute, grab your binders. What?
That's are you talking about the thing I said? Like, what?
Yeah, right on.
Like, why would you be so excited about that? Are you still doing this business at the end of lunch using a pass? You just have 50 minutes.
Yeah. I remember this.
All right, I need to see Lifeline B6.
That's our student teacher there.
So like,
You can go over HA one time.
that was so awkward. I was like,
You're welcome. My whole plan just changed because my TA has not yet shown up. But it'll be interesting to get your feedback. All right, grab your binders, guys. We're looking for Lifeline B6. Ladies, I will mark you tardy in 1 minute if you're not in your seat with your binder. Let's go. Pick up your binders back there. Alex, grab your binder. Claudio, period 5, sir.
Oh,
Thank you. Who wants to deal with that after? Hopefully if somebody shows up. They're graded. The scores just aren't told. Okay, looking for Lifeline. Grab your binder back here. All right, straight from where we left off. I want you to draw three diagrams. If you were here last time, you have this information. We only have one assignment in this new unit, so it should be pretty obvious where you might be able to find these. There you go. Good job. Good job. Good job. Perfect. So the neater you draw, the easier it'll be to understand. Good job.
All right. I wish we had ample time and we could kind of digest. I'd love to get your thoughts. Maybe if you have some takeaways or things, save that for the end. But I hope when you're seeing this kind of that idea of students coming in and just getting ready, grabbing their binder, finding their stuff, starting to, open it up. You're starting to see other kids do that. And then when I start class, the bell rings, I wait for it to get quiet, and then I reveal that prompt so we can engage together. And you'll notice I'm like very present. I'm not taking attendance. I'm not doing anything. I'm on. I'm walking around, proximity, right? So kind of like active teaching. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. I hope you also picked up on the student who came in just a little bit tardy. The starting routine is inclusive. If what I've noticed over the years is if a teacher's starting or beginning routine is exclusive for students who might be late for some reason, it can create management problems. So the expectation is on time or not, you know exactly what to do, jump in and engage with the learning community. The other thing is this is not a quiz. It's okay to get it wrong, right? I believe starting class with a quiz does one of two things. It makes the kids who get it right feel good and engage with you, and the kids who get it wrong feel kind of badly, and I get to spend the rest of class trying to re-engage you, because who wants the opportunity to fail at something the moment we begin every day? Not me. So just this idea of a kickoff, getting the lesson going, okay? Part of this, just some of the science and learning behind it, what you didn't hear me do is do a review like, hey, this is what we did last time. Does everybody remember that? We're going over these things. I put up the question and let them try, right? And it's actually a strategy called generation. And it's effective. If you look at that second sentence there, generation is an attempt to answer a question or solve a problem before being shown the solution. So we know from the science of learning community that if I can articulate what I think it is, right or wrong, no stakes, it's okay either way. And then we engage in the conversation and the reteach, that dialogue, I'm more likely to clear up that misconception. So it is meant to be this direct reteach. Students are writing it down. Really interesting science or cognitive research around handwriting versus keyboarding. And it's not a quiz. It could be a pair share. It could be anything a teacher wants to do. They don't have to all be written. It can be drawing. There could be people who are acting things out. I've seen all kinds of really creative uh, implementation of this, but the whole idea is we're reflecting, right? And as John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on the experience. So if we can just get in the habit every day of just starting with a reflection, we're going to increase retention. At the end of what we call this kickoff time, as much time as a teacher wants to or not want to use, it's totally up to them. We end with what we call the checkbox, and it's a simple self-assessment for students. And I challenge you to think about how often in the modern classroom are students being given routine opportunity to figure out what it looks like when they get it, because it looks different for everybody, right? What does it look like? And how do I know when I get it? Or more importantly, maybe when I don't get it? How do I know what I know? How do I know what I don't know? And knowing that piece is really important. Something called metacognitive feedback-driven metacognition, actually. Um, and so we call it the checkbox, and it's pretty simple. 1, I don't get it. 5, think I got it. And you might have been in classrooms where teachers are kind of having students do that somewhat publicly. It's seen this is private. It's just a number on my weekly lifeline. And the teacher is the only one that's really going to see it because these are collected at the end of the week, right? A couple things happen there, though. Part of that active teaching of me walking around is that's all formative feedback for me. I might have thought my lesson on Friday was a home run, and all my students on Monday or Tuesday are ones and twos, or the opposite. I thought my lesson just tanked, and it seems like everybody's getting it. That's really immediate and formative feedback for me. But what I love most about it, and I tell my students this all the time, it creates learning environments that where it's okay to be a 1 or 2. It's okay to being on the road towards getting it. That's just part of the journey, right? I mentioned this, I probably did last time, that, inherent to learning is failure and risk of failure. So part of this checkbox, this self-assessment, is making it clear to students that, hey, yeah, you might be a 1 or 2. What's most important is that you know that, and we take steps to mitigate or address it. So these all end up back in that B page. They have this collection of them as they're going throughout the semester and the school year, as I mentioned, as a resource to look back on. Now, we typically would go to our second step, which is that green agenda. I'm going to jump to the end real quick, primarily because we begin and end the school day or the school period, the class period, on this weekly lifeline. It's kind of this cyclical rhythm to the day, and we're just taking advantage of the first few moments and the last few moments. So if you had one of these, again, wished you had one in front of you, you could flip to the backside of one of those weekly lifelines. There's 18 of them in the semester 1 part of the student bundle, and then there's a refill. So the students have one for every week of the school year. But you can see that little kickoff area. And then right below it is a space for a reflection that we call the learning log. And in the same way that this beginning routine that I just explained is incorporating retrieval of things we learned or experienced previously, the learning log is designed to be that same kind of activity, that same reflection, but on the things we learned or experienced today. So just a few moments to kind of digest, what did I learn, what was confusing, and it becomes, the way we sell it to students, if you will, is this is a private, again, like that checkbox, one-on-one conversation between you and your teacher, right? And they're going to prompt you at the end. And we know you've all heard the expression that beginning with the end in mind. So this learning log is really that teacher's target for each lesson, beginning with the end of my, where do I hope you can articulate or demonstrate or make connections to at the end of this time together? And how I'm going to craft a prompt that tries to elicit or get that information out of you. Okay. And some of that could just be that I'm confused and I need help in this and this and this, but it's really just about this dialogue between the students and the teacher. And it really is predicated on the prompt. So for all the schools we work with, we have what we call the educator dashboard, and there's all kinds of resources there for support. One of those being our guide for educators. And in that guide, there's multiple pages of these sample prompts, because what we've learned is that the quality of the student reflection here is really predicated or based on the prompt. Because what students are going to do is they're going to tell you what they did. And that's not formative feedback for the teacher. They know what they did. They designed the lesson. So we're trying to get to that deeper, kind of more metacognitive space. And if not so much reading this, if I could draw your attention to the lower left corner, you'll see that yes with the big arrow written in it. That's a teacher commenting on the student, right? Same thing here. You can see kind of the comment here. And I will give you a moment if everybody, if your screen's big enough, can read this. I'm just going to pause for about 30 seconds and then I'm going to tell you about this. So this was a student. I write about her in my book because I really pride myself on student teacher relationships. And it's actually the thesis for my master's degree was the impact student teacher relationships have on academic success and learning. And so connecting with kids was kind of like what I did best. And this student started off the year. She's known as the student with the black hoodie because she was one of those kids that wore the same hoodie every day to school. It's black hoodie. And she started off kind of what you would think normal, gregarious kind of school year interacting. And then as the school year progressed, she started getting more and more and like progressively withdrawn and signs of it. First, she just kind of stopped interacting as much. She seemed fatigued. Later, she started wearing her hood, which was like against the school rules, but I let her do it. I was like, something's going on here, you know. And then she started tightening her hood down and kind of sulking down. And as much as I would try to connect with her, I couldn't. And then one day I receive, I mentioned this at the end of the week. These weekly lifelines are submitted to the teacher at the end of the week. We don't have to go over that kickoff, the beginning routine. We did that together, but you read these reflections, these notes that students are sending in to you, and you're commenting back. And this is the only place that I dare teachers to try this whole program I'm going to be introducing you to, because if you do it and you read them, you walk in on Monday the next week, and it's like having a pulse on every kid in that room in a way that homework will never tell you. It's their own voice, it's their own words. But what I realized when I started doing this, I first designed this was because I wanted to know where students were. Like, where are you? Where are you confused about? Where are you learning? Help guide me as your teacher with this formative feedback. But then here's what I kind of stumbled upon, because a good friend of mine wrote a book called The Language of Behavior. It's just out this year. It's co-authored it, but one of his sayings is to get knowledge to the brain, you have to go through the heart. And if you think about what does it mean to a young person, especially a young person kind of living in chaos or uncertainty, when a caring adult asks them to write to them every week, every day, and collects them and commits to reading it and passing them back. At a minimum, it means that it communicates something different than grading classwork and homework. And what I really believe it communicates is that I care about you, that you matter. And what I've seen, and I have lots of stories from this over the years now, students will, when they find themselves in that predictable environment, they're feeling safer and they know this person, this caring adult, is reading these, they'll reach out, almost like a cry for help at times. And this student, only because of this learning log, she shared, and I later learned because we had a whole intervention and student study team and whatnot, all good things. But she was living with her grandmother, and her mom was homeless, unhomed, and her mom had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And she's thinking that she's starting to hear voices, right? And it's getting progressively more intense throughout the school year, hence her behavior, which was just a byproduct, of course, of what's going on. And who cares about photosynthesis or the nervous system? You can see that we're clearly studying the nervous system because that thing at the top of the kickoff, the intercostal and the plexus, that's the nervous system. Who cares if this is what's going on in my mind, right? And so setting this up, one, it's formative feedback for teachers, but you're really getting to know your students in a way that, like I said, classroom and homework won't ever tell you. But the real point of it is this idea back to retrieval, that if we're going to transform learning, we must focus on getting information out, a strategy called retrieval practice. Patrice Bain, the co-author of this book, she wrote the foreword for my book, Unbelievable Honor. But she's the first teacher where they did actual research. Pooja Agarwal is the researcher, and they did it in Patrice's class to try to figure out how come your students are so successful. And a lot of it is based on this retrieval, giving students multiple interactions. And that's really incorporating this retrieval practice and these exposures, right? Is think about this. I'm going to draw again your attention to the last sentence for the sake of time. Elaboration is the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words, connecting it with what you already know. So I got to go and retrieve it, but then I'm elaborating on it. That's that learning log, right? New material, stuff I just learned, expressing it in my voice. I'm not just copying down the notes I took in class, right? And making connections with what I already know. That's all about this retrieval. And what it's ultimately doing, Marzano and many others have shown this. The research has shown this over and over, that the more exposure students have to what they're learning, the more likely they're to get it. So his suggestion is exposing students to details multiple times, at least 3, ideally no more than 2 days apart. Well, let's look at what I just introduced you to. On Monday, I give a lesson. Maybe that's the first time I've introduced this concept or idea or whatever it is we're learning in the lesson. That's standard. First exposure. And at the end of class, I'm asking you to just kind of reflect on that. And where are you at with that? And right, learning log. Second interaction or exposure. And if I give you any homework or next steps outside of class, that could be the third exposure. And when you come back 24 hours later, within seconds of starting, we're right back to that concept or standard. And I want to be clear about this. The teacher's not doing anything else, right? These are lessons and content they're already teaching. This is just weaving it into this routine. And by doing so, with very little effort on the part of the teacher, it's increasing those exposures, which is increasing the retrieval, all the while flexing that working memory, which is increasing retention. All right, I'm not going to spend that much time on the rest of these, of course, because we'd run out of time, but I really believe in painting those gray areas black and white. Sometimes the most underutilized class time are the first few moments and the last few moments. And we can really exploit that for teaching and learning. But let's go back to the beginning. We would have kicked the lesson off, students check themselves, and then we quickly turn to this agenda. Obviously, nonverbal visual cueing, green, letter C, gives me a moment now as a teacher. Now I could then put my attendance while I'm introducing the lesson, talking about what we might be doing in class, or if there's any next steps or homework, and then I would move on. Okay, just meant to be a brief snapshot, but also increase predictability and buy teachers time to take care of some class business stuff, because everybody needs that time at the beginning, and that's not that kickoff. We're not kicking the lesson off. But the reason I designed it this way, this kind of looks like a calendar or a planner, deliberately called an agenda, because it's not a calendar or planner. It's just a log of this class and what we're doing each day. But what I can do is I can model planning and time management by saying something like, hey, we're going to do a lab this week in this science class. I'm going to introduce lab reports next week. But your first lab report in this class will be due at the end of next week on the 25th, Friday the 25th. So let's write that on our agenda, because that's what people do who keep a calendar. And I won't give you homework the night before so you can prep it and finalize it. And let's go ahead and write that on our agenda, because That's what people do who keep a calendar. And then I'd move on. I know I'm doing that a lot, just on occasion, but I'm modeling this idea. Think about that college course where I get the syllabus and I'm supposed to just be ready to go on week 15 because it's in the syllabus. But if no one's ever shown me how to unpack that and put it on a plan or a calendar, I'm less likely to be successful, and it has nothing to do with my ability. It has to do with this skill. So the next day, we kick the lesson off, update the agenda Wednesday. And as I'm going through these 2 weeks at a minimum, no one's going to be surprised this large essay or test, something kind of weightier is coming up, lab report in this case. And on the higher end, just by introducing a lesson, I'm really starting to introduce students to this really, of course, important skill of how do I plan and time block and manage my calendar, right? Not leaving that up to chance, okay? So kick off, review, clear up misconceptions, introduce the lesson. Third step, get organized. Here's our hypothetical day, the 14th. We've kicked that lesson off. I introduced the agenda. Anything that we're going to create or you're going to be given gets listed on this table of contents, and in most cases, teachers dive into their lesson. Very small time footprint. Follow this date column. Next day, kickoff, agenda, table of contents. Oh, we have two things. Okay, we're going to be taking some notes, and we get this heart diagram. It's not even worth anything in the grade book, but I want them to have that cross section while we're talking about the circulatory system. So as I'm going through here, I want to make a point, follow that date column. All of these, or some of these, are very kind of different types of assignments, which would mean they might be in different categories in a teacher's grade book, which is fine. And it can even be very equitable because you can weight the things that matter more in terms of, excuse me, the grading category. Categories in a grade book are not a schema to teach or model organization. And sorry, everybody. The reason for that is that a teacher's unit plan, their unit sequence, sorry, is just as important as the daily lesson plan. And what I've seen in organizational systems that have like a section for notes, a section for homework, assessments, or different categories, is it takes this sequencing that a teacher hopefully very intentionally designs and rips it all apart. We lose that kind of cognitive cohesion to all of this. And we don't want that. We want to capture it for the sake of clarity. So each day, we're just going to add to the table of contents. Takes just a few moments. This number, by the way, students are keeping track of their score. This would be G1. That number just gets written in the upper right-hand corner so that when we get to the end of the unit, we take that table of contents, staple it together to create a unit chunk. And in one of those organized binders, there's a full-length tab that says completed units. Put that table of contents there, get a new one, start the next unit. So every like 3 or 4 weeks, whatever kind of a teacher's unit sequencing is, the cadence, it's kind of like a new beginning, new table of contents, start over. But if I'm consistent with this, here's 2 students studying for a cumulative final at the end of the school year with everything they've created or been given neatly chunked in these thematic unit packets, hyper accessible, in conjunction with a kickoff prompt and response for every lesson of the school year and our reflections for every lesson of the school year, which all end up back in the portfolio to create this year-long or course-long data or evidence binder. Some schools call it the crown jewel. And even more so in our increasingly digital life, this evidence of my effort in learning. But the thing I want to make very clear is we don't know their grades. This is a byproduct of clarity, modeling, and routine. This organization you're seeing is just the third step of every single day. Through repetition, I'm giving students practice with these skills, and they can be doing so simultaneously or in conjunction with either they might be struggling with the content of that particular class or that particular lesson, but they're still getting practice with these executive functioning skills because it's a byproduct of the routine. And how cool is it that a student could walk with their portfolio? Maybe they passed the class, maybe they got that C-, they still have their binder as evidence. Now, in most cases, that's a daily routine, but on occasion, we reference this toolkit, which is behind tab F that you can see there. And these are any resources or tools, as the name suggests, that a teacher might want to add to or reference throughout the school year from unit to unit, lesson to lesson. And what we don't want with these tools is that they get trapped in some of those unit chunks. So like for me as a science teacher, for example, I would always, of course, introduce the scientific method somewhere towards the beginning of the school year, which would probably be in that unit one packet, unit one chunk. And I could also be setting up a lab right now in late April, early May. And I used to do this is I'd have kids in their lab groups and I'd say, okay, pause everybody. Everybody turn to the Cornell notes you took in August on the scientific method. And you'd see all the binders pop open to the F tab. And I'd say, find in your notes there, what, how to write a hypothesis. And before you design your lab, your experiment, and bring it to me for approval, review that together so you have all the steps that you need to write a correct hypothesis. And then I would pause and I would celebrate with all the kids in the room and say, look what you just did. You just referenced notes without thinking about that you took almost 8 months ago. That's actually far more important to me that you can do that. You have that kind of dexterity than if you get your hypothesis right. Okay. It's the screwdriver that's in my toolbox. I use it. I don't just leave it stuck in the screw, put it back in my toolkit because I might need it in an hour or next week or whatever. So helping students make that distinction and for our work as trainers in a program, helping educators make that it's not just all stuff from school. Some is the stuff we're learning, and some of these things are tools that are going to help me be successful with that. So some interesting things that can happen here with around the academic toolkit. And to make a very clear distinction, it's just instead of number one, number two, that would be content, F1, F2, F3 in the upper right-hand corner. But in most cases, in terms of what a teacher is doing, kind of that teacher load or cognitive load, start with that kickoff, introduce the lesson, quickly get organized, dive into your lesson. At the end, have some reflection so you can hear from students and know where they are. Same thing every day. On occasion, reference that toolkit. So the 3 of those 6 executive functions, you can see here, working memory, planning and management, and organization. Where we're going to head next is goal setting, the binder check is accountability, and self-regulation. That'll be how we wrap session 3. So that's about as quick as I can go. Sorry for my little coughing fit in the middle there, but I wanted to leave some time for some questions. But as I did last week, and I do with every talk I give, I love ending with duet, that as we raise standards in our schools without giving students the means of reaching them is a recipe for disaster. It just pushes the poorly prepared or poorly motivated students into failure and out of school. And I've seen this. I've seen it in my classroom, and now I've seen it in lots of classrooms, that giving students the means of reaching them, that piece is this executive functioning, but it's just a byproduct of that clarity, modeling, and routine that I halfway introduce you to today. Again, that's me. I can leave that up, but we have a little time to chat. Deb, I didn't go too long this time.
Excellent. Great ideas. And, of course, for our students, but of course, things that we could be doing too in any environment. I'm going to ask anyone who has any questions or comments to jump out there, put them in the chat, or unmute yourself.
And while we're doing that, I'd love to hear from you all. And I know that's what I just introduced you to. I chose a very kind of teacher-centric example. So any questions you might have about how that translates, or comments, takeaways?
As you were talking about how students enter their information, what I'm seeing was a classroom of people writing in their notebooks and in their binders. And so the first thing I thought was, okay, if I was a therapist or somebody helping somebody and they had difficulty with handwriting, what are the
Yep.
other methods of access? And then I heard you, I was so happy to hear you say they could draw a picture, they could do this, they could do this, and
Mhm.
they could act something out. And so, really, from universal design, that's giving people a variety of ways to share their knowledge. So,
Yeah, and
I like
everything I
that.
showed you, it's in the analog. So I mentioned that educator dashboard. Everything you saw exists digitally at our dashboard for anyone that's working with students with the program to access. So if a student really, if the handwriting piece is prohibitive for engagement with the routine, then we can go digital, we can pre-populate. So there's fillable, savable versions of that. So ahead of time, some of that work can be done. You'll see, I've seen it, I've done it in my classrooms where students, I mentioned, I'm not going to show that kickoff until we begin and we all begin together. Well, some students might get that prompt ahead of time on a little slip of paper. So the process, and they've been thinking about it. There's all kinds of ways to UDL that kickoff for sure, and the learning log for the whole program for that matter.
And it makes me think of over the years, I've taught at the college, at community college level, or supported kids, K-12. But anytime you would ask, how's that class going? Or, anything, there were no words. Fine. Okay, well, what does that even look like? But now you've given me a chance to, quantify it with saying, here's how well I know it. And I'm going to, in the beginning, maybe put just a couple of ideas in my reflection, but over time, I'm going to start building that a little bit. So even being able to talk about it, it seems to me like this kind of support is going to get answers beyond it's fine.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
It's a
That really is
measurement.
about
I mean,
that's the artful prompt, the creating prompts, which is really fun. You get into this, like, what am I trying to elicit? That idea of getting information out. Um, it's a fun process. Any comments, questions from anybody?
I think I saw one of the questions that came in after in our survey last time was finding out and pairing with the gen ed teacher when a lot of our folks are in more of the supportive roles. And
Hmm.
so, as the teacher, and you had students who also had supports from related services, etc. Are some of the things that you could share as strategies for approaching or really partnering up with the teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if I told you guys the story last time, but I was doing some walkthroughs with a district in Arizona that with the special ed director. And what she commented on, what she liked from her lens, um, was the inclusive factors. So you walk into a class and you can make assumptions about who you think who's who and what labels students might have, but you really can't tell because they're all engaged collectively with this routine. And another district, one of the support providers, and I may have mentioned this last time, what her big takeaway is the adult and supporting the gen ed placement was the clarity it brought them in the support. He said, if I walk into a class and I can't figure out the expectation and the routine, how is this kid gonna figure it out? Or any of these kids. And I'm like here trying to figure it out and I can't. There's too much ambiguity. And with this, it's just this is right where we're going to begin. I mean, there's just this very clear rhythm so that that support piece, um, like I'm thinking of a high school in Southern California that we work with. And the special ed department is just part of course, the whole fabric of organized binder. And the expectation is when you come to my class, whatever it is we're going to be working on, if we are working on content from a class, you bring that organized binder. And the first thing we do is, are you keeping up with the routine? Do we need those adjustments? Is it a handwriting thing? Is it maybe not? Maybe you're just being lazy and you didn't put anything behind your table of contents, but the clarity around support. And I would, if we have time for this, but I don't think we have any business holding young people accountable until we very, very clearly model for them what it looks like first. And too often it's like, here's your planner. The school bought all these planners and they give them to kids, and it's just a huge waste of money on top of like an ambiguous expectation. Like, what am I? The 10% that are using it after 6 weeks are the kids who've actually practiced and have see the value and hone that skill. Everyone else is like, what do I do with this thing? I don't want this thing. It's more crap to carry. So if I can model it and have this expectation of, hey, this is the tool to participate and you can totally do it, now we can start talking about accountability in a support way. So yeah, I think that that clarity helps the support provider that much more, or at least that's what I've seen. Does anyone on the call kind of, can you see that? Does that resonate or make sense? I see some nods, so I'm going to
We're
take that
at
as a
time,
yes.
but we certainly welcome you to unmute and share your stories. Joy, I know that you have the organized binder that we saw on
Joy's
the
always on the
bookshelf
spot
last
there. Yeah.
time.
Oh,
And there's
she's got it.
Michelle.
She was
Yes,
flipping through.
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Tell us
So,
about where you've been with it.
so I'm currently working with a third grade teacher who has one of my traumatic brain injury kiddos in her class, and one of her main areas of concern is her organization. And so, as a school, they kind of have their system that they do. So I'm just slowly introducing this to her. And the great thing about this teacher is looping to fourth grade with her class. And so I'm going to set her up. I have another copy of your book, and I'm going to give her the book and the binder. I'm going to say, here, look into this. This is going to be great tier 1 for your whole class as you loop into fourth grade. And at the same time, you're doing something that's completely inclusive for the student who needs this the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I'm at with that one. And my director had we purchased, like 5 binders, 5 books, and then that's our thing, is we're gonna, this is a resource. This is a great way to, if I can only get a classroom to do it, then a classroom does it. But I
Great place
expect
to
to
start.
create the ripples,
Yeah.
one little ripple, and then it will like spread through the school. It's kind of my vision for that. So
Joy, definitely feel free to share my email with that teacher if I can be
okay,
of support. But yeah, starting small too that's the way to go. I mean, just to
yeah,
thoughtfully kind of roll it out. And to be clear, I mean, this tier 1, the gen ed, like your student clearly could use practice with executive functions, but make no mistake, every kid in that class, every kid in a post-pandemic classroom, my
oh,
assumption is, and the interesting thing, forgive me, I keep saying this, and I mentioned this last time, it's because it was this global phenomenon. I've never lived through anything like that I can remember. I'm 53. I'm talking to educators on every continent, and we're all having the same conversation. Like, wow, this really had an impact specifically around these executive functioning skills.